piggyback on my colleagues who have had excellent presentations so far with noble and thought-provoking ideas. I would like to take the positive role of the translators and interpreters in brokering peace and look at it from the flip side of what our keynote speaker talked in details earlier today. While I agree close to 100% with what Zaki said earlier, and I want to emphasize on the role of the translators and interpreters in the interaction between the two parties that don't know each other's language and culture. I would also like to mention that a translator and interpreter needs to be creative and given support, is given support as part of the equation in this interaction. And I will explain more. So I will concentrate my presentation on interpreting situation though, because interpreting requires quick reaction. And I don't have a slideshow. I'll be talking live and would like to make it as interactive between me and the audience as possible. And I would like to ask you, please raise your hand or leave a comment in the chat area during my presentation if you would like to add to the conversation. If you would like to add as I'm speaking, that would be great, because that makes it interactive and not boring, because I don't have fun slides to show you. I would like to ask Shailene to help me if I don't see the person who has raised hand, or if I don't see the chat specific question that needs to be responded immediately. So to continue, I need to, or I would like to actually set the scene for you and explain what I mean by interpreters being the peace brokers and the flip side of gatekeepers to the power corruption. To set the scene, I have to tell you a little bit about my background and what I'm doing right now. I have, before that though, I have to mention that I have for the sake of security and for the sake of confidentiality, I cannot reveal exactly who I'm working with. But I can say, for example, just imagine it's a group of doctors or very high ranking professionals that I am working with a group, an international group, trying to help them and their families evacuate from Afghanistan. So I am the only interpreter in this group, and there are two sides. There is, I call them the foreigner side, which is the international community. There are individuals, very high-ranking individuals from around the world who are helping very high-ranking individuals from Afghanistan who are still in Afghanistan and who are actually in a very, very hard situation. So what I am doing in this situation is I am not only interpreting, but also providing cultural consultation and providing also something like 24 hours by 7 customer service, if you would. You know, I call it customer service. It might sound a little corporate wording for it, but for the lack of a better word, I am just saying customer service, because through the awesome program of Signal, which is a little safer than WhatsApp. The people whom I'm helping in Afghanistan can contact me by text or phone calls, and the people, the international community, that for the ease of use of word, I call them foreigners, they can also contact me through this Signal program. And I am providing assistance 24/7 in the last, I think starting January, February. The reason is because Taliban started capturing cities since February. Actually, they had Herat, and then they came to Mazar, all the big cities. And the last place that came to the Taliban's hand was in Kabul, which was August 15, which most of us might remember, that big plane and the people hanging to that plane. On those days, I was just working like crazy, trying to help people go to the airport and get to that very plane. And since then, I have continued working. And if there is any question in that regard, by the way, I would, as far as I know, or as much as I can tell, I wouldn't mind talking about it a little bit. But when people contact me or I contact them, because we made a database of all the names of the families, with the head of the family as the name of the family and everybody who is under that family, and provide support to them when they want to leave Afghanistan, all the way until they get to the final destination, which can be any European country, or, you know, I can name all the countries that they have been so far, is Canada, US, New Zealand, Australia, Spain, Germany. This is as far as I can think of at this very moment. But they have to go to a second country, as funny enough, they call it third country. They go to the third country first, and then they are being transferred to the final destination, which is where they will be making home after they leave their country. So in this process, there is a lot of communication, and I need to be the peace broker, because there is a lot of miscommunication. There is a lot of misunderstanding. I'll give you some examples that are very fresh in my mind. For example, and by the way, another country that they are in is Ireland. So, and each country, when they go in, there is a lot of problems in the culture in that country that, again, they have to be communicated with the newcomer to that country as the new immigrant or the new asylee or asylum seeker to the final destination, so that there are easier relocation, or what do they call it? I forgot, resettlement. For example, when they get to the country, the first thing they want is, from Afghanistan, is halal meat, which is the butchering of the animal in the way that Islam has said. And it's the hardest thing to communicate between the two groups and making sure that they are provided with whatever they need. And then it goes on, it continues. And then there are a lot of cultural concerns for the Afghans when they go to the, even when they are in the third country. Some are relocated in Greece, in Abu Dhabi, in even Turkey and other countries as the third country. They still have a lot of problems, cultural communication and cultural needs, that an interpreter can help create that understanding between the two sides. So as I mentioned, for example, in Ireland, and by the way, one of the first thing they want as soon as they get to the safety is the rest of the family, because when they when they are evacuated from Afghanistan, there are a lot of limitations, and they cannot bring family. I mean, they can bring only immediate family, which is the person that we are giving support, which are, by the way, we provide, this organization that I'm working with only provides with the head of the household being a woman. So the woman whom we are providing support, her husband and her children who are under the age of 18. Now, a lot of them have children who are, under the 18, but also over the age of 18. And they have sisters and mother-in-laws and mothers and fathers and parents and, a lot of people that live with them. And a lot of them are, for example, women who are living with their sisters whose husband has been killed throughout the last 20 years. So they have been like the breadwinner for 2 sisters and 1 brother as well. But then the evacuation process doesn't include the sisters. So they agree to leave because these women and their families, their children under the age of 18, because they are under so much threat that they cannot stay in Afghanistan for even 1 more day. So they say, okay, we will take it. And now they go to the 3rd country, finally, after a long process, by the way. It doesn't happen overnight. But then they want their family, the rest of their family, to join them. Then again, we help them as as much as we can. But that brings a lot of miscommunication and misunderstanding again, which the interpreter can play the role of the peace broker at this stage, because they ask or request for things that the foreigners, as I mentioned before, I call them foreigners just because I want to say that I am referring to a large group of people who are from different countries that are helping them. They don't understand a lot of their needs, or they misinterpret their needs. Before I forget, a lot of the 2 parties, a lot of time, they use Google Translate for communication. And a lot of funny things happen, believe it or not, or misunderstanding on the negative side of it. For example, one time, they try very hard, I can imagine, because the Afghans try very hard to be agreeable and to communicate in English as much as they think they can. So they were saying, they were saying something in Farsi, and they had given it to Google to translate, and Google translates word for word. Google doesn't understand exactly. So one of the words that was translated in Google Translate, I will tell you what it was translated, and then I will back translate, and so that you can experience this whole misunderstanding. To set the scene, this was from a woman who was agreeable, an Afghan woman who was agreeable all throughout. So she's in Greece as a 3rd country, and she wants to thank the foreigners for providing this evacuation process. She, at the same time, she is having problem. The problem is that, as soon as, imagine a large group of people getting into Athens, and they have to be, placed in apartments or in places, and they have to be provided food and everything. It takes some days to put everything in order. So they were thanking the foreigners, the Afghans were thanking the foreigners. And then at the end, they said, we have been hungry for 3 days, and if you can't provide this, we will take actions. Now, the foreigners came to me and they said, what kind of actions are they going to take? Are they going to take it to the streets? Are they going to, they were so worried that after all of this hard work and they are just finally there, they're going to take it, demonstrations. So I could immediately see the problem. And, a lot of things at the same time was happening, and I was like, my head was like this big because I had to provide interpretation, and using this great signal program that I said, I had to provide translation of their messages, and a lot of different things going on at the same time. I could immediately see that this was a Google Translate, and it was something very benign. I mean, I just say benign because I want to say it had nothing to do with taking to the streets or taking any protest. They were just saying, let us know so we do something to resolve the problem. This very small, this might seem small as a word translation, but it was creating a lot of misunderstanding. And already the foreigners were thinking, no matter how much we do, they still want to protest. But then from the Afghan sides, they were trying to say how agreeable they are and how much they want to help and see and bring their own resources to this situation. And that's what I mean by creating or being the peace broker. And that, immediately in the midst of all of that, I knew that I had to clear this misunderstanding. So I immediately explained to the foreigners that's what they mean, and I went back to the person and I said, please don't give your Farsi words to Google Translate, especially if you want to say anything as important as what you were just saying. By all means, send them to me. I will translate and I will send your message to the foreigners. Now, since a lot was going on, a lot of them couldn't wait this much. They wanted things and they couldn't wait. So they still would give their words to Google Translate, and there would still be a lot of misunderstanding, but I could stop to, I could be as part of the person in the middle so much. I remember there were days that I was not sleeping for 3 days. I was working like 24 hours for 3 days. And it was interesting. My brain was still sharp and good. And for some reason, I could manage function pretty good. But maybe because it was not like a conference interpreting that you need to be very, very fancy and use a lot of complicated words and stuff. It was all basic needs of human being. But that was an easy part. Later on, as I was mentioning, when they went to Ireland and they wanted to have a family join them, they had said in their initial request to be evacuated, they had said that they were living, this person had said that she was living with her sister in the same house. And I know, as a person who knows homes in Afghanistan, it's very easy for 5 families live in the same homes. And the homes are built in a way that you can manage, live separately, but in the same household, in a way that there is a concept in Islam called mahram. And mahram means a woman has to cover her hair from anybody who is not blood related. The only 2 people who are not blood related and a woman does not have to cover is the father-in-law and the husband. Other than these 2 people, the rest of any men who are not blood related, a woman should cover. That includes your brother-in-laws, your especially brother-in-laws in this case that I want to tell you the story. So this family, these 2 families or 3 families, in fact, were living in a home, and they had, one family was living upstairs, the other family was downstairs, and they had walls or not even wall. It was like it could be covered by a curtain so that the woman doesn't have to cover her hair. Now they come to Ireland. Ireland doesn't give them that opportunity. So doesn't give them that that they can put a curtain between the 2 parts of the house so they can live together. Now they came back and they said, we cannot live together. The foreigners were crazy about this when they heard that. They said, you lied to us. You said that you were living in the same household. How are you saying that you cannot live together again anymore? Now, I had to explain everything to the foreigners, that they are not lying. They were really living together, but this was the arrangements that they were doing when they were in Afghanistan, but they cannot do the same being in this home in Ireland. But it took about a week of a lot of unnecessary conversation, because I was not in the middle of, or I am not in the middle of everything. They already were speaking using Google Translate, and they had already created a lot of misunderstanding. So we had to take a steps back to clean up the misunderstandings and bring them back to a space of understanding and agreeable situation, so that both sides would trust each other again, and the foreigners don't think that the Afghans were lying, and the Afghans wouldn't think that the foreigners don't understand their problems, because they were also frustrated. They thought, why they don't understand them. Now, one of the foreigners was telling me, so why don't they tell us the problem? Why don't they tell us this whole mahram thing that you explained to us? You know, my answer was, a lot of times they don't, for the lack of not knowing English. Sometimes they might even be embarrassed. You know, they don't want to talk about something that is so different. You know, when they go to Ireland and they see the whole, such a different culture, and they think that they just don't want to talk about all these details. And also because their brain is so much filled at the moment when they get to the final destination for this, you know, they're in this survival mode, that they cannot even think about explaining these complex cultural differences, or at least, excuse me, complex in their mind, to the people who are helping them. I cannot tell you how much the Irish people were frustrated, and they were so upset, and they said, we are not going to let any more Afghans to Ireland because they lie, they are hard to deal with, and they were just giving me all the different reasons that they wouldn't want to help them. But then when I explained to them, and then that's where I felt I was brokering the peace, was because I realized that I was the only one who could understand both sides, and I had to talk with both sides. Not only I was talking with the Irish, but also talking with the Afghans, telling them how much they can expect their culture to be accommodated, and how much they have to also be flexible. And that brought a lot of peace and a lot of understanding, and I haven't heard back from them, hoping or thinking that I could create peace. Let me just see some of the questions. Shailene, can you help me with some of the questions at this point, please?
Yes, absolutely. You have one, well, you have a couple, but I'll start with the first one. How can we help to make the Afghan truth known with so much lack of transparency, miscommunication, and misunderstanding?
What do we know? But I mean, Elsa, can you, you're more than welcome to unmute yourself and tell me what you think about, or what you mean about lack of transparency, miscommunication, and misunderstanding. If there is
I think that, yes, I think that you're giving us good examples, but I'm also thinking back of the keynote speaker when he was explaining that due to so much corruption and misinterpretation and translations, how that has created such a, I think, I mean, this is the first time I'm hearing that there has been a lot of things done because of personal interest or power, and then, you know, and that undoubtedly contributed to the fall of um, of the country. And I think that most people probably are not aware that all of this, maybe interpreting and translating, was done that way. So, you know,
You
how
mean
can we
the
help?
the misunderstanding of in the Afghans in Afghanistan at the time of
Right.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's a different different part of what we are dealing with. I thought you meant with the Afghans who are coming to the US. I think that has a that there are a lot of reasons for that, and that needs to be explored in a different presentation. I don't want to talk too much about what our keynote speaker was talking, because that's his ideas, which I agree, by the way, I agree. And as I mentioned earlier, I saw this in 2006. I went to Afghanistan for the first time, and I noticed how bad the quality of the interpreting at the time, more than translating. And actually, because I have been translating since 2002, I think. Actually, before that, I was even translating and interpreting for the Afghans, but more concentrated in Afghans since 2002. And I could see the quality of the translation when I was still in the US, and in a lot of conferences that I interpreted, and my Afghan colleagues who were interpreting here, I would see the quality of their interpretation that was very poor, because we didn't have enough people who could speak both languages well enough to be at a level of a conference interpreting. So not having enough resources brought low quality services, both in fact in the US and in Afghanistan. So when I went to Afghanistan and I saw the situation, I thought I came up with a solution, but the solution required a lot of resources, which I didn't have at the time. And also the resources, meaning financial resources, of course. And also, as Zeki mentioned earlier, it all was about who you knew and what network you were part of, which I wasn't part of any of those networks that provided money and funded those programs. I had a great program, you know, I had a business plan, I had everything that is needed, and I had the full support of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Afghanistan. I had the full support of the Kabul University. They were so happy about my program. They, you know, they wrote something and they put their stamps, which is very important in Afghanistan. If you put your stamp on anything, that means you are fully supporting this. So I had all of these for my plans to have a school of training interpreters in Afghanistan, but I didn't get any financial resources, because those financial resources would go to people who just had big pockets and did nothing for Afghanistan. Unfortunately, big money for even translating and interpreting went to people who were retired of military, you know, military people retired in the United States, who made a big company overnight and could have those contracts and hired people with $200,000 a year. The people who, a lot of them, honestly, came back to the US because they were hired by these American companies. These were bilinguals who were living in the US, and they were hired by these Americans. And because there was war in Afghanistan, they would get workers' comp, they would get into workers' comp cases. And when they came here for their deposition sessions, their English was not up to par and well enough to answer the questions in deposition sessions. So I had to interpret for them. And these were interpreters who were in Afghanistan charging or being paid $200,000 a year for their interpreting in Afghanistan. I'm just giving this information so you know how things went wrong and why things went wrong. If they had hired, these people were hired by these big US companies who had no idea what interpreting means. They just could have that contract with the government when the contract, $1 million contract for interpreting was out. And they would hire people and send them over there, and it was hard conditions. They would come back with, as I mentioned, a lot of them came back with workers' comp, and they couldn't go back to those countries. But that's a little beyond what I meant to say for my portion of the presentation. I hope I have answered your question, Elsa. I don't know if that was enough for today.
Farah.
Farah, we have another.
You also have a hand.
We have a couple of more questions, but also we have Bayo who raised hand. So if you want to ask a question or directly to Farah, please feel free.
Yes, Bayo, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bayo Malola. I teach Yoruba language. Thank you so much, Farah. I would like you to quantify. I know that you have spoken about the weakness with Google Translate. From your experience, if you are to rate Google Translate, what percentage of success or failure would you attribute to it? And what advice would you give to Google, the company?
I don't know if Google would listen to me, but Google, I don't think Google has the same ratings for every language. And Google is just a machine algorithm that takes the language, including the vocabulary and the grammar of each language, from whatever that is already there. And it's like just imagine there are two columns. One column is the English, the other column is Farsi. And Farsi, whatever that has been the Farsi equivalent of that particular English, or vice versa. So what they do is, what they did, as far as I know, is that they took Iranian publications from daily newspapers and magazines and anything that had both Farsi and English, and it's like they put them all in one pot, and they just put one column in front of the other column, with the full stop or the periods being the segments, and they kind of matched them, and that's how they come up with translation. I don't go into much details, but that's how they do it. Now, having said that, first of all, for Farsi, if I want to rate it, it will have only whatever that has been given to Google, which is mainly from Farsi, mainly for Farsi in Iran, which is a little different from Farsi or Dari spoken in Afghanistan. So there's already a little difference. But that can be compensated in some ways. I mean, I'm making it I'm simplifying it so that I can prove my point, is that at the end, if the person who is writing in Farsi, and for the sake of our conversation, writing in Dari, which is a little bit different from Farsi, then the translation can come differently, because Google doesn't have that equivalent in Dari. It might only have it in Farsi. So it gets confused, and then it comes up with translations that don't make sense. In this particular instance, or the example that I gave, though, it's just Google doesn't know or doesn't understand the difference between the two words that are in Farsi and also Dari, that there is only one word for two words in English. So the one word in Farsi, which can mean both, we will take action or we will do something. These are two expressions in English, but in Farsi there is one. So Google might choose one time we will take action, another time might use the word we will do something. In this particular instance, it took the word that says we will take action, and then it created misunderstanding in English. So to give a number in the question you asked, I cannot give a number. I'm sorry, I do not have enough background information to give a number. But from my own experience, I would say when I am translating, I'm in a rush, I might give it to Google Translate, but then I have to post-edit it a lot.
So, thank you so much. I think you are just being economical about it. I would expect you to, I'm sorry that I'm just being blunt the way I'm passing comment. Supposing you are grading users of Google based on the experience that you have had. Supposing you take Google as a student and you want to access Google, what percentage would you give to Google based on your observation, which can be, I'm asking this question so that anybody using Google Translate will have an idea of what is happening, and possibly other interpreters can share their experience based on, their experience about Google. Maybe they can share it here so that we can have a clear view, because not everyone speaks all the languages. If you travel, you don't speak a language, and you say, okay, let me see what Google can do for me. So how credible would that be for you? If you have an idea of it, even if it is an estimate, 40%, I will just rate it. I know that rating is relative. You can rate it 40%, another person can rate it 50%. Your proficiency level, your depth of knowledge will determine how you do your rating, even though there are criteria there. So possibly you understand what I mean.
Bayo, if you allow me, there are other questions. And since the content of this presentation was nothing about Google, if you allow us, we will answer other questions. And if we get time, we will get back to your question. Is it okay?
Thank you so much. Thank you. Yes.
Hey, Farah, Ida has her hand raised. So Ida, you can go ahead and ask your question. Never mind.
Ida, yes, please.
It was in relation to what we were talking about, which you said we would leave it for now and go on to something else. So never mind.
Thank you.
Okay, Farah, I'll read your next question. You are interpreting in crucial and critical moments when translations mediated and mediating encounters can change lives. In these crucibles, what are some principles you employ with respect to translation and interpretation being, as you say, a means of peace brokering?
Thank you so much, Albert. This was a great question. I think about this a lot. I think what I can do to make sure that the two sides understand exactly what they want to say. The other side, in fact, wants to say. And a lot of times, I also understand that each side might be frustrated because of the lack of knowledge about other things that are involved in that conversation that they are having at the moment. I gave you the example of the mahram thing, that is the woman has to cover their hair. There was a lot of other other things involved in that particular communication, and was going on for a long time. I just thought, what would be at that moment? I just thought, what is missing that I can explain separately to each person? And I have a lot of conversations individually with the people. It's interesting how these very high ranking authorities, some of them older than me, I'm already quite old, but they are still older than me, they still take my words, and after a little while that we talk, they trust me. There was another problem yesterday, actually, that I was dealing with for, not yesterday, it was the day before yesterday, for 2 or 3 days. And the person had problems because she had brought her mother with her, whose mother was quite old and needed a special assistance from wheelchair to portable potty and a lot of different things. To make the story short, I just want to tell you how hard it was for this person. This was, by the way, going to the final destination. And when they go to the final destination, they start with, they call it the 0 stage. So the 0 stage, they go to a hostel. And imagine a high-ranking person going to a hostel with her mother who needs a lot of help. And she was frustrated. And she was not, or let me just take back a few steps. She had bad reputation for her previous actions because she was very upset when the things happened in Afghanistan, and she wanted to leave immediately because she really was, I mean, if the Taliban found her, she would be killed immediately. So she was under a lot of stress, but at the same time, she didn't want to leave her mother in Afghanistan. But then the team who was evacuating her said, no way, we cannot take your mother. She took she took the initiatives and took her mother with her. And that created a lot of problems, from security protocols, breaching the security protocols, to a lot of different things that we don't want to talk about it. But I understood all of what I just explained to you, that she could not leave her mother there. And I could understand the other side, who was trying to make her trip as safe as possible, so that they won't get into any trouble or they won't get killed. So they were feeling very responsible, but then they had ended up having bad reputation for her as somebody who doesn't listen. Now, I knew both sides, how they thought about each other. So what I tried to do was just talking to each of them separately and making sure that each side comes to a middle point that has some understanding about the other side. And there were some things that couldn't be compromised for each side. This is when they got to the to the resettlement, to that 0 level, 0, whatever they call them, 0. I think they are called class 0 when they first get to the resettlement country. But at the end, this person whom everybody thinks that she is very hard to deal with, she was telling me, I want to kiss your hand. If you were close to me, I would kiss your feet. And she was just saying all these things. And then at the end, she said, you know, for some reason, I haven't seen you, but with the way that you read poems for us, it makes me feel like you're a kind person. Now, you know, every once in a while, I record myself with some Persian poems for them that relates to the situation, and it seems like they like it. So I think that creates some sort of outside the situation, creating some trust and respect. The reason why I brought all these examples is that there is a lot involved in interpretation, and there is a lot of tools or we have to get creative to find ways to communicate so that the two sides trust us, especially at the time when security and the safety of one person is at risk. I don't know if I answered your question, Albert, but I just wanted to say how much is involved in addition to what you interpret at the moment. And you build up rapport, you build trust, and you build connection in the situation that I was working or I am working now. And I think in the situation that when we say welcoming stranger is when they come to our community, that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that they trust the new community and we trust them. So that's what I talk to them as well, is to create trust.
Farah, there's somebody who has their hand raised for a question, so that person can go ahead and unmute and ask the question.
Yeah. Yes. Hi. Good to see you. Good to see you and good to hear you. It's really it's good to be in this forum. This is the conversation, the chat that you probably couldn't follow because you were talking about other things. Is we do a lot of cultural mediation also. Just one point before I talk about that is let's review. There is a distinction between translation and interpretation. What you're talking about, of course, is interpretation, which is the oral, immediate oral response, which goes with our job. The translation, when we do it, requires, as we found out from the poetic translation presentation that we heard, gives us a lot more time to think about these cultural interpretations that we need to do also. So let's be very clear about it. There are two different sides. And you are, of course, in the spotlight because you have to interject the cultural aspect of things immediately. You don't have the longevity of time to think about the right wording. You have to do it immediately and translate the cultural aspect of things on the spot, interpret the cultural aspect of things on the spot. So that is one thing that came to mind as I was listening to you. I want to change the conversation a little bit to something else that came to mind today when we started off, which really got my attention. And I please don't want anybody to be personally offended. This is not a personal affront, but in the many years that I've been participating in, just like you, Farah, in the many years that I've been participating in translators and interpreters conferences, and this is one of them, be it in Montgomery College or in person in ATA conferences and so on, I don't ever remember the conferences starting with an ode or a video concerning a particular conflict. Every year when we get together, every time when we get together, and us as international mediators, international brokers, we are always involved in some kind of an international conflict somewhere in the world, and I don't ever remember having a start pointing the limelight to a particular international conflict. And today it started with a particular international conflict. Now, don't misunderstand me. I think that what is happening right now in a particular part of the world is horrible, personally. But I really don't think that this particular platform is the right place to talk about one particular conflict when each and every one of us coming from a particular part of the world can point to a particular issue happening in our or other countries, including what's happening in America. So I really protest having started the conference pointing and having the anthem of Ukraine as a starting point of this conference. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Farah, you have another question in the chat.
Okay.
They want to thank you for your work, and they'd like to ask, what are the tools that you use to support your work, and do you believe that it's very important to be proficient in both the source and the target?
That's a great question. Yes, that's the first thing, the first tool, well, I don't know even what to call it, tool, thing, whatever, is that you need to know both languages, not only the language, but also the culture. And the person who is involved in interpreting or translating. Translation, as Ruti just mentioned, we have more time, or our other presenters have said, we have more time to make the final product, being a translation, as great as we want to. As Catherine, I believe, was saying earlier this morning, that she goes back and fixes her translation from time to time. But in interpreting, you don't have a lot of time. I mean, you do and you don't. In this kind of work that I'm doing right now, I might have some extra work, extra time to work with each side, because I can go back and I can talk to them individually. And that is the cultural part. So that's one of my tools, is I go back and I talk with them if I can do that. Even in conferences, a lot of times, you know, there are high-ranking people that I'm interpreting for them in a conference, but I spend time before their presentation and after their presentation. And I always think this is you know, the conference or the situation that has brought me to their service is an opportunity for me to communicate with them as one part of this conversation, to learn about the other part without the other party, without making one party better than the other party. By that, I mean, I just have to be neutral. I have to be transparent. I have to be impartial. And I have to just let the other party know about the other party. That's all I do. And I think that's the best tool that I just mentioned, to be impartial and transparent, but also think that the person that each side doesn't really know the other side enough. You know, they don't know their language. And if they are coming here to the United States, they don't know the culture here. And I don't want to embarrass them. I have been involved in many programs that last a month. So I travel with the person. And I have seen many situations that I know if I don't communicate with them in advance, they are going to get embarrassed. So I help them. And then that creates a space of trust. You know, eventually, after like day 2, they trust me and they know that I want the best for them. So in the job that I'm doing right now, for example, a lot of times they write something to me, or they talk to me about something, and I tell them, okay, write it down, I will translate it for you. And then they always say, this is what I have written, can you please make it better? That's because I am their language, I'm their tongue, I am their thoughts, I'm everything that they, you know, they have to trust me for saying whatever they want to. And when they ask me, make it as good as you can, that tells me that they trust me, that even whatever that they are missing, I can compensate. So I have to know enough to compensate for whatever that they are asking me. A lot of times they, you know, I interpret for the interviews in, you know, different radio stations or TV stations, and the Afghans always tell me in advance, please fix it if you make any mistake. And again, that tells me that they trust me. If I have time to spend time beforehand, I can create that trust. That helps me a lot, and it helps both sides a lot. So I would say trust would be one of my best friends in making this conversation happen.
Farah, last question. It says here in the chat, clearly you need to be cloned.
Oh.
Is there a checklist of some kind that could anticipate situations, give examples, etc.? Or could there be one that could be made? Example, halal, what it means and where to go for those products.
Exactly. That's a great question. And as I mentioned about mahram, for example, I knew that the mahram concept will come up. So I had written a long write-up about this whole situation, and it's a little complicated. It's, you know, if I say you don't have to cover your hair from your from anybody who is blood related, then the people would say, so you have to your husband is not blood related, do you have to cover? Well, that's not it. So I have to explain with more details, and I did that for as I mentioned, the foreigners. Not all of them. I didn't know that it would come up for all of them. And there are so many different parts of different information that I can't constantly write about things that might come up, and to everybody. I do as much as I can and prepare each side, as I mentioned, for example, about mahram, about halal. And I will communicate with each side. For example, about the Irish group that I mentioned. Again, this is a little outside the conversation maybe, but many years ago, I had translated a book by Mary Robinson, who was the first woman president of Ireland. She wrote a book, and it was like autobiography, and she explained about her life from, I think, when she was born, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, this is about, I don't know, 15 years ago that 15 years ago that I had translated it. And I had translated it from Farsi, from English to Farsi. I couldn't find any publisher in Iran or Afghanistan to publish it because it had a lot of things against the Islamic Republic. I mean, not a lot, or not against directly, but because of the censorship in Iran, they wouldn't publish this book. So it was in my, in my drawer, just getting dust. And I thought, well, maybe this can, I'd already translated it and I had it in electronic format. Then I thought maybe I can just share it and make a book club with these Afghans that they can read this book, who were in Ireland, of course, and it would help them understand the culture in Ireland. And I haven't been able to make that book club yet, but I think that would be a great way to help these women who are struggling with a million things, including understanding the culture, in the form of a book club that they can hear it from somebody as important as the first woman president of this country that they are living in now, and learn about the struggle that this country went by itself. Ireland went through a lot, and through this book, Mary Robinson explains all the struggles of Ireland and her struggle as becoming the first president of Ireland. So I think we have to be more, even, you know, I think it would help a lot for the Afghans who are in our communities now coming to the US, having a book club would help them, or we have to become creative and find ways to include them in the community and work with them to learn about the other culture.